I used to work as a radio DJ in southern Ohio, not far from Cincinnati. I had a crappy late-night show with maybe 5 listeners put together. I played a lot of oldie music, like stuff from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Most of the people that listened to me were over-the-road truckers that were driving through and would call in to shoot the shit and request songs to get them through the long nights. One of them, Randy, was a regular caller, and he always had a funny story to tell and would often request older music from the 60s. One night, it was getting late, and it was a pretty slow night. It was about 1:30 a.m., and out of boredom, I asked my callers to call in and tell me about a time that they had something strange happen to them. A few people called in. They weren't unusual stories, just your run-of-the-mill stories of deja vu, being in the right place and the right time. And then Randy called. "Hey man, how are you tonight, Randy?" "Oh, hey there, KJ. Boy, do I have a story for you," he said in his deep southern accent. "Well, you've reached the right place to tell it. Well, this is one of those stories that are life-changing in a way. It happened when I was about 16. I worked at a hotel my uncle managed, and I was helping by running errands, cleaning rooms, taking out garbage, and doing laundry. Well, this one night, some lady comes in, an older lady, with dyed hair, only it's dyed jet black except for a white streak. She has on makeup, but it's nearly white, and she has on ruby red lipstick that is smeared on the corners of her mouth. Her eyes were all done up in jet black eyeliner and thick mascara, like a corpse. Well, I only noticed her because she had this bright green suit on and carried a bright pink suitcase. She had insisted on staying in room number 6. Number 6, as in 666? Well, maybe. I honestly don't know, he said. Well, my uncle had given me the cue to go up and make sure the room was ready, so that meant that I had to run out and check to make sure it had clean bedding and that the garbage had been emptied. Well, when I got to the room, there was some trash in the wastebasket, so I took it to the dumpster to dump it out. I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings, and after I emptied the garbage, I turned around and that crazy lady with the messy lipstick and the green suit was just standing there looking at me. She had these coal black eyes, and I had not noticed them before. She put out her arm and began pointing at me. I stood there just looking at her with my mouth gaping. Then she said something weird. She says, "You have an appointment at midnight." Well, I looked at her, and she slowly turns and walks away, back toward the room and shuts the door. Before she does, she points at me again, this time just smiling, with that crooked red grin of smeared lipstick. "Now that is a weird story for sure," I said, shaking my head. "It gets better. That night I get home, and I go to bed. It's roughly 11:30 or so. I'm drifting off to sleep, and suddenly, my legs feel like they are burning. I sit up in my bed, and I look at the corner of the room. There's this weird, shadowy figure just standing there. I can't make out what it looks like, but it starts to cackle. It reaches out its hand, and then before I know it, it's morning again. Must be the strangest thing that's ever happened to me, and I swear I've never been the same. I think it put a curse on me. Everything in my life always ends or people die. There are times I feel like it takes possession of me. I don't know what to say. That is the strangest thing that ever happened to me." Well, thank you, Randy, for sharing your experience. We have to go to commercial now. I sat there and got ready for my next caller to call in. The commercial was over, and then it was time to take the next call. "Hi, this is KJ, your late-night host with the most unusual stories for you tonight. Who's next? Welcome, caller. You are on the air." I sat and waited and didn't hear anything at first, just some breathing. It was heavy and sounded as though whoever was on the other end was either sick or having trouble breathing, or was snoring. "Hello? Caller, you're next." Again, nothing, so I hung up the phone and picked up the next call. "Hello, this is KJ. You're on the air." I waited, and again there was nothing, just some wheezing or heavy breathing. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I hung up the phone. I saw my technical assistant, Troy, walk by, and he looked in. Everything okay, man? He asked. Not sure, I mouthed, holding up my hands. He looked at the telephone, and then out of nowhere the building lost all power. Even the generator was not working. I had no idea what was going on, so we both found flashlights. We tried to see if there was any reason for the malfunction, and just as he was getting ready to investigate, the power came back on. This time, almost all the phone lines had someone waiting on the line. This never happened. I looked at Troy, and he looked at me, and then I apologized on the air for the malfunction, and then took the next caller. I looked up at the clock, and it read 3:36 a.m. I only had an hour and a half to go. Hey there, KJ. Randy here again. Is everything okay? That was really weird. Oh, hi, Randy. Thanks for the concern. So after your last story, you got anything else for us? Seems like all the other callers are sleeping out there, I said, noticing all the other calls dropping when I picked up the call from Randy. I felt tired suddenly, and the air seemed to go out of the room. I took a drink of my coffee inside. Oh my, yes, he said in a high-pitched hiss. So many stories to tell, but only one, I think, for you, my dearest KJ. His voice sounded as though he were doing a very bad imitation of a grandma. I held in my chuckle. This was going to be good. Oh, really? What kind of stories do you have, Randy? Randy? Randy's no longer with us. Us is very scared for poor Randy. Us has a message for you. I was holding my mouth to muffle the laughter I was about to burst into. This was hilarious. So, tell me, what is the message? You have an appointment with the master very shortly, he hissed. The line cut off and Troy looked at me. He too was laughing now. This is going to be amazing for ratings tomorrow. I smiled, but I was just on the verge of unease. Randy had never called in and acted so odd. I mean, I didn't know him personally, but he always seemed like a guy who wouldn't just call up and pretend to be a demon. I took a few more calls, and then at exactly 5 a.m., I got off the air and hurried to my car. I knew it was probably theatrics, but it was still creepy. I got into my car and drove home. At the time, I lived alone, and I had a quick bite to eat, showered, then went to lay down. I was lying in my bed when I slowly began to doze off. It was completely dark in my bedroom. I had those shades that blocked out the sun, so I could get a bit of shut-eye before I had to get up and do it all over again. I was just drifting slowly off when I felt my lower half burn. At first, I thought I just had an itch, so I scratched my leg to kill that burn. It slowly got hotter and more painful. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. There was a shadow slowly moving towards me in my bed. I sat frozen, unable to move, and it began to cackle. It was cackling and slowly gliding in my direction, and then I saw these dark eyes that were darker than the night itself. I reached over the bedside and turned on my lamp. I jumped out of my bed and looked around the room. Eventually, I fell asleep on my couch. I didn't hear from Randy again after that night. I only worked as a DJ for that station a few more weeks before I quit. The pay wasn't worth it, and I had this constant uneasiness working there at night. I was never one for believing in paranormal stuff, but that experience was odd to say the least. I had some odd experiences over the years working in radio, and if I think of any other crazy stories, I'll write them out. I just hope I never meet the acquaintance of whatever that thing was in my room. And I hope if you're out there, Randy, that you're safe. Part 2. I left Cincinnati not long after my experience with the weird phone call, or demon entity. I moved to Northeast Ohio, and I was looking for other work, because being a radio host had sort of become who you know rather than what you know to get a really good job. I was looking for a job in marketing, and at the time I lived in a basement apartment belonging to a friend of mine. The setup was really nice, too. I had my own laundry room, fireplace, a bedroom, kitchen, and small living room. It was really quiet, too. At night, due to the lack of windows, it got extremely dark. One evening, I happened to be coming home from the grocery store when I saw a slew of cop cars across the street from my house. I asked my buddy and landlord, Jim, what happened. He had no idea, and after a few hours, the commotion was over. I didn't think much of it, and the following weekend came. Jim asked me if I wanted to go with him to meet up with some of our friends at a bonfire and maybe hook up with some ladies. I had been out the night before and was still pretty hungover, so I chose to stay in. I stayed up watching television, and then when I was finally tired enough, I went into my room and went to bed. Around 4:45 a.m., I felt my bed moving. It literally was being knocked against the wall of my bedroom. I was lying on my stomach, and my hands were against the wall under my pillow. I slowly opened my eyes, thinking Jim was shaking my bed to wake me up for some reason. I happened to look to the right side of my bed, and I could see the outline of a man with spiky hair, just standing by my bed, looking extremely confused. "Hello?" I said. I was wide awake by this point, and I could clearly see the outline of him. He looked younger than myself, and had this confused, contemplative look on his face, and then he turned towards me, as though he heard me, and then vanished before my eyes. I got right up then, and looked around the room. It is safe to note that I was more confused than frightened, but when I got up, I felt like I needed some fresh air. I grabbed a can of that Starbucks Power coffee from my fridge and went and sat outside. When Jim got up, he joined me. "Hey man, why are you out of bed so early?" "Not like you have a job to go to, KJ," he joked. I laughed. That was typical Jim, always the joker. I proceeded to tell Jim what happened, and he thought it was strange too. I figured he would think I was nuts, and I noticed the strange look on his face, and he looked down into his coffee. I had a similar experience before I left for the party last night. I was standing in the bathroom taking a shower, and I happened to see a shadow, or like an outline of a man standing on the other side of the shower. I laughed and yelled to you, saying something like, "You change your mind, man?" But it wasn't you. When I got out of the shower a few seconds later, your car wasn't even in the driveway, and there was no way you could have left that soon. He and I were both really freaked out by it. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in my Easy Boy chair eating some lunch when I saw a story on the news talking about the home across the street. I called Jim and told him to find the channel, so he too could see the news. He stayed with me on the phone as we watched the story. The guy that lived across the street had shot himself in the basement after going off his antidepressant meds. I heard Jim sigh on the other end of the phone. We both were in disbelief, as we both suspected it was the same ghost or apparition we had seen. I know this sounds weird, but that young man's confused look on his face I saw, I believe, was him reliving the confusion he must have felt before he decided to commit suicide. That being said, not long after that experience, I finally found a new job at a local marketing firm. I remained at my buddy Jim's place, and the house was pretty quiet after we realized it had to be the kid from across the street. It made Jim and me a little sad whenever we talked about it, and Jim and I became really interested in the paranormal. I told Jim about my experience in Cincinnati with Randy, and he thought it would be a fun idea if we made a Ouija board out of some cardboard. "Don't you kind of want to know what happened to him after we last saw him, or if he's still haunting us?" he asked. I agreed that I was indeed curious to know more about it all. It was a majorly stupid idea, especially after we already knew the kid had been depressed. He was probably just confused and in purgatory. That didn't stop us, though, and we made our little spirit board. Picture this: 2 28-year-old guys drawing with marker on cardboard. I was sure this is why neither one of us had girlfriends. I grabbed a whiskey glass for a planchette, and we lit some candles. I should note that we decided to do this in my place, in that dark basement. So we sat at my card table with our fake spirit board. We tried to be as serious as we could be. "I'll ask the first question, and we can see what happens," Jim said, sitting up straight and closing his eyes. "Is there anyone that would like to talk to us tonight?" Like the freaking worst question ever, right? I kept my eyes open, and on the board as the whiskey glass began to move to the word yes. "It's working," said Jim with his usually kid-like excitement. "Okay, your turn, KJ." I thought about it for a second, and then asked, "Are you the kid from across the street?" It quickly bolted to the word no. There was a light chill in the room just then, and I swear I felt the temperature drop by 20 degrees. "So who are you?" Jim asked. It slowly moved down to the word goodbye. It would not move any more for the rest of the night. We gave up on our silly quest and left it at that. The following Monday I was at work when I got a call from Jim. "Hey, there was a lady that stopped by today looking for you. Really weird looking lady too." "Lady? Did she have a name?" I asked. "No, she came to the front door, said she had been looking for you for a while. She was older, and man, when I say she could use a little makeup lesson or something, I'm not lying. She had all this caked on white pasty powder and all this black eyeliner. The crazy thing is she had lipstick on, and it was smeared red all over her face like a clown. It was weird, but I thought maybe she was a relative, like a drunk grandma you never mentioned." I sat on the phone, and then I realized what he had said. Oh my god. "Any chance she had on a green suit?" I asked, recalling the story Randy had told me all those months earlier. Yeah, only the thing I thought was weird was when I asked her for her name, she just smiled and said, 'Oh, he will hear from me again soon.' Then she laughed and walked away down the street. I could feel my blood going cold, and I wanted to run home, pack my bags, and move to the farthest state possible. Whoever or whatever she was, I didn't even want to know. I recalled how much it hurt when that thing came to me in the middle of the night, and my legs felt like they were on fire. I did finally manage to muster up the courage to return home. I told Jim about my own experience, about a demon calling the radio show, but I had left out the description of the woman. I decided to let it go and not get into it any further with Jim. He got way too into these things now, and to be honest, I didn't want him getting hurt or chased by anything the way I had. Maybe if I never mentioned it to him, it would ignore him. I was lucky, and she never did return that night, or that week. That was 10 years ago now, but the woman in green has been popping up throughout my life. Only the crazy thing is, I've never seen her myself. She has never shown herself to me personally, but I'm now married, and once she showed up at my house, and my wife saw her. My wife, Beth, the smartest woman I know, was so weirded out by the lady's appearance, she wouldn't answer the door. She only mentioned it to me in passing a day or so later. I have no idea how to explain her presence, or any of the other things for that matter. I could go on all day about these weird occurrences. Part 3. As I mentioned before, there have been numerous experiences throughout my life. It just went into overdrive after that phone call from Randy, the night he and his demon, or whatever he was possessed with, called me. Not to mention, there was that woman in green that kept popping up throughout the following years. So let's address that. I had gotten married and we had a daughter, Olive. Olive was always my pride and joy, and she was a lot like her mom. She was smart from a very early age, and even had a bit of a sense of humor. She had started kindergarten, and after that things started to get weird. She was just a normal 5-year-old at first. Then she began to tell her mother and I stories about her new friend. Her new friend would visit her on the playground at school. She said her friend was nearly 7 feet tall, and after a while, based on the stories she told me about Henrietta, we confirmed that she wasn't real. There was the fact that she could fly for one, and walk into walls and go through them. My wife Beth and I just played along, as it isn't unusual for little kids to have pretend friends. We would hear Olive talking to herself in the attic that we had converted into a playroom for her. She played with her Barbie dolls and talked to no one, and she was basically a little kid with a lot of imagination. One afternoon, my wife was showing Olive how to make Christmas cookies. They had the kitchen a complete and total mess, and Olive was just giggling, playing, and rolling out the dough, and making things out of them. Beth was trying to show her how to use the cookie cutters, but Olive, being who she was, wanted to make her own thing. That was Olive, always thinking outside the box. My wife looked at the shape of one of them. It appeared to be something with a head and feet, but she couldn't make out much more. She put them into the oven, and they made every color of the rainbow to ice them with. Finally, they were done, and cooled off enough to decorate. My wife showed her how to put the eyeballs on snowmen, with little black sprinkle eyes she had bought at the local craft store. Olive laughed at the eyes and seemed to want to put them on everything, even things that shouldn't have eyes, like candy cane-shaped cookies. Then Olive got out the icing and started to really concentrate on making one of them. She was serious and determined to make it look perfect. Beth noticed our daughter seemed to be really concentrating on her little project. "Olive, what are you making there? A Christmas tree?" My wife asked, puzzled, because Olive had begun using all the green icing and most of the black. "No, it's Henrietta, my friend." My wife stood over her and just watched as Olive painted her little cookie. "What is Henrietta like?" she asked as she watched Olive take out the red icing for lips. "She's nice. She tells me things about stuff." "Like what things?" my wife asked. Something was odd about this Henrietta. "Like stuff, Mommy. Like how her friend the master is always watching, and how Evan and Maria are only nice to me because they want to trade the sandwiches that you make for me." "What? Who is the master?" Olive laughed, and my wife just looked at her. "Look, Mommy, I made her belt just like she wears on her green dress." Our daughter didn't know the difference between a suit and a dress, but when my wife told me later, I knew then that the woman in green had been visiting my daughter. Things got even weirder after that, though. Olive had been told by my wife that she was not allowed to hang out with Henrietta until we met her. "Okay, I'm excited for you to meet her," she said, and then ran off to play. My wife and I looked at each other. I had told her about the weird radio show call and the story of the weird woman in green. Who was she? At least I had some sort of name for her now. I pondered, calling a priest even though I was not a Catholic. We hoped by telling Olive that we needed to meet her friend, that if she was just a ghost, she would maybe stop bothering with her on her own. Then maybe this woman would leave my family alone once and for all. I know it sounds crazy, but it was worth a shot, I thought. The next day I was sitting at home alone, and my wife was in the backyard with Olive. They were hanging up Christmas lights, and Olive was playing in the snow. I heard a knock at the door, and when I went to the front door to open it, there was no one there. I thought maybe it was Olive trying to be funny, and I went back to my chair and the television show I had been watching. I heard the knock again, and I got up irritated this time. I opened it wide, and again there was nothing there. I was about to tell Olive to stop playing around, but I let it slide. Kids would be kids. I went back to my seat, and I sat there for about 10 more minutes when the knocking began again. This time, I had it. I looked out the back window, and I could clearly see Olive and my wife building a snowman. There was no way Olive could have gotten to the front of the house and then to the back that quickly. I gulped and went to the door again and slowly opened it this time. Again, there was no one there, and I started to feel uneasy. I looked around, and then I looked at the front porch. There was a box sitting there unopened with a red bow on top. Had it been there before? I just grabbed it and took it inside and sat it on my kitchen counter. Whoever had left it must have really wanted me to find it since they kept knocking. Who left this box? What was in it? I looked at the package. It was a gold box with a big red ribbon on top and a little card. I opened the card, as it did not have a name on it. I looked down at it and read, in disbelief, "KJ, Master is still waiting. In the meantime, please enjoy. H." It was short and simple, and all the proof I needed that Henrietta was real. I looked inside the package, and it was an obituary for a Randy of Louisville, Kentucky. My face went white as I stood there. I read and reread the obituary numerous times, but nothing really stuck out. When my daughter came into the house, she smiled at me. "Daddy, did Henrietta bring you the gift she told me she was going to give you?" My wife and I looked at each other. I had to find a way to rid myself of this woman. The next few days I noticed Olive seemed depressed, and so my wife and I sat her down to ask her why she seemed so sad recently. "Henrietta said you guys don't like her, so I can't play with her anymore. Why can't I play with Henrietta, Daddy?" I had so many things going through my mind as what to say, but my wife spoke for the both of us. "Because we asked to meet Henrietta, and since she doesn't want to meet us, you can't play with her." It sounded reasonable, but later that night my daughter woke from a nightmare. At least I thought it was a nightmare. She was bawling her eyes out about her favorite teddy bear trying to pull her hair, and how it had hurt. My wife and I were not sure if it was real or if it was just another bad dream, as kids often have them. "We have to do something," my wife said to me. "I don't know what to do," I said to her. Then it dawned on me. Jim now had a group of friends he hung with that did paranormal investigations. I figured I would call him in the morning and have him come by. I hadn't seen Jim in almost 7 years, but I found him on Facebook. I messaged him that night to see if he was free to have a beer the next day or sometime in the coming week. I left him my cell number and told him to call me or text me. The next morning, I got a call from a very enthusiastic Jim. He had not changed one single bit. "Hey man, I'm free tonight after Abby takes the twins to ball practice." I agreed, and we met up later that evening. I found it easy to talk to Jim even after all the years that had passed by. We both were married now, with families. When I asked him if he recalled the woman he had seen that day when she came to my door, he nodded and seemed uncomfortable. "She was freaky as freaky comes, man. Yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but she has been following me for years." "Years?" he asked, confused. I then told him about the night Randy called me from the radio show, and what happened to me that night, and even weirder, how after I moved in with him she followed me, and that is when he met her. I explained to him about Olive and the package. "There's only one reason I can see she's around you. It's Randy," he said. "But why?" He chugged the rest of his beer and sat it down hard on the table. "That is what we have to find out. What do we know about Randy?" I pulled out the obituary. I had brought it with me just in case. He looked at it and gasped. "Did you even look at the date of death on this?" "I think. Why?" "It's 3 days from now." I looked at Jim, and I couldn't feel my feet. It didn't make any sense. How could I get an obituary for a guy with a date in the future? We decided to track down Randy and find out if he could help us figure out what was going on. I told my wife what we had planned to do, and she offered to help me in any way that she could. We managed to track down his last address, thanks to the white pages on the internet. Randy didn't have any social media or anything like that. We had to do things the old-fashioned way. We got into our car and traveled to Louisville. There was a cold front that caused a mighty snowstorm on the way, which we both found odd. It was like some sort of supernatural force was against us from the beginning. Of course, Jim was in his element and enjoying every second of this adventure. A stroke of luck hit as soon as we crossed the Ohio border. There was barely any snow in Kentucky, so we kept driving. We found the little house where Randy had lived, and when we got there, we braved the way up to the door and knocked. We waited for what seemed like ages, and were about to leave when the door opened. I thought I was going to be sick. It was Henrietta that greeted us with a smile. "Hello, can I help you?" smiled the older woman. There was something off about her. She wasn't wearing 5 inches of caked in white makeup, and she wasn't wearing a green suit. She had her hair up in a bun and wore a white sweater like someone's sweet little grandma. There was no way this was the same person. "Is there a Randy that lives here?" Jim asked first. "Oh yes, that is my son. My name is Pamela. Perhaps I can help you? What can I do for you?" She must have recognized the strange look on both of our faces as she noticed the cold, brisk air. "You know what? Why don't the two of you come in and chat? I just made some homemade eggnog. Please," she said, insisting. We both looked at each other and went in. I sat at the table, and she handed both of us a napkin and a cup of eggnog. The house was small, but very clean, and I knew then this was not the same woman. "You two look like you just seen a ghost." She laughed, sitting across from both of us. "It's because you look like someone." That is when she got a strange look on her face. "You must mean my mother." We both looked at each other. "Did your mother wear a green suit by chance?" "Oh, that horrible color was her favorite. She died in 1947 when I was just 6 years old. She was a horrible person and mother. Tell me, what did that evil witch do this time?" I slowly explained to her my story, and she listened and seemed to understand. Then she took out something from her glass curio cabinet. It was a small photo album of a little girl with black hair just like her mother's. The woman standing next to her was a much younger and more attractive version of the woman in green. Henrietta, it seemed, was very involved in a practice of occultism that involved making sacrifices to the ancient god Moloch. She went crazy, and apparently she got this way after getting involved with a very influential man in a local town. He was very involved in an organization like Satanism or something. She had nearly killed Pamela in a ritual when her father came home from work just in time. He ran her off with a gun and she never saw her mother again. Her mother died in a car accident a few weeks later, as she was on her way to meet her lover.
She is still haunting people, and wherever she shows up, bad things happen. I noticed it with Randy when he was younger. He had some weird encounters, and then I had to call a friend of mine who was sort of a medium. She told me the only way to get rid of her is to always have something around you that's either lavender color or smells like lavender. She hated lavender. I know it sounds crazy, but it's like its own exorcism.
Why would she send us here? I mean, she gave us this obituary for Randy.
What about Randy?
This was left on my porch the other day. That is actually partly why we are here, I said, handing her the obituary.
It was to scare you. She wasn't counting on you to be smarter than her. Demonic entities often try to trick people. It is the fear she feeds off of. You can't be afraid no matter what you do.
We sat with her for a long while and then thanked her. So far, we have followed her advice, and we keep lavender flowers all around our home, and my daughter's room is adorned with lavender flower decorations now. Olive still has strange encounters, but so far none of us have seen Henrietta. That was over a year or so now. I'm just hoping it stays that way. There are signs that she's still around. I have heard of other people having encounters, but my family has been free of that old bat in green since the night we met Pamela. We couldn't be more thankful for her.